Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind. Week 2 is almost in the books and we're here to talk you through it all. Let's go.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Good evening. Week 2 is almost through, another exciting week. I actually think this week was more fun and exciting even than week 1. I feel like things are starting to settle. Teams are kind of getting into their groove and we're seeing some really great football. So, Paul, how are you this week? Did you enjoy your Sunday?
I did. So every 3 weeks I get a Monday off work. So this was my Monday off work. So I actually stopped up till the end of. I didn't stop and watch the game at 1:20, but I watched all of Red Zone and stuff like that. So it was really good. And as you'd have seen in one of our group chats, this show is going to go a lot different to what I thought it was halfway through the second set of games. So, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit.
I know you were excited. You were so excited, and I was just clinging on hope that they were going to crumble. And of course, they did in true Cardinals fashion. And so I'm really happy because all of our teams lost this week. It wasn't just me, even though the Bengals really should be winning at this stage. But hey, I'm kind of getting over it now, and I'm going to tank for Caleb instead.
Yeah. So you're gonna take the mick out of the Cardinals for paying Kyler Murray loads of money and then want to tank for Caleb. But what you're gonna do now is back the Bengals to pay Joe Burrow loads of money and then tank for Caleb, yeah?
Well, yeah, why not, eh? You know, he's clearly rubbish. So we need to do it.
No,
I just wanna
Oh no. So we left all in charge the buttons again this week.
Apparently
what happened.
Apparently my screen went off, so I just tapped it just so it'd turn on and it played the intro video again.
Well, I mean, I know you probably wanted to start again, Paul. You know, it's not great when the Cardinals blow a lead again, but
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's been a bit of a disappointing start to the season for me, but hey, you know, I've just got to keep going. You know, hopefully by the end we'll be better than the Cardinals and the Rams, but who knows at this rate.
So I'm gonna get into this with you a little bit now. So it kind of goes into our first bit where we talk about news and stuff like that. So obviously Joe Burrow has retweaked his calf injury, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Do you now have a different look at everything? Obviously after week 1 you were like, oh, we didn't really get anything going, we looked awful. And then I watched a lot of what was on the Red Zone and stuff like that, and you had little moments, but you didn't look great. Do you now look at it and go, well, there's a good chance we're without Joe Burrow for the next 3-4 weeks? Do we just automatically presume that that's the Bengals sort of season done? Because you're in a tough division, let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to want to see it like that yet. He doesn't want to commit to anything at this point. My suspicion is that he's going to try and play through it if he can, which, rightly or wrongly, I can kind of see him trying to do. I think ultimately we're going to have a mediocre season and probably not make the playoffs. Now, obviously, last season we started 0-2 as well. We have massive issues when Joe Burrow doesn't play in the preseason or through training camp. Every year he started slow, but every year he's missed training camp. And I just think it's like this is like their preseason, which in some ways, you know, it is understandable, but in some ways it's really frustrating because this year's even worse because we had 2 division matchups straight away. So already we're 0-2 in the division, which is going to be the challenge for us. Now, as I say, last season we did the same, but ultimately we won 10 games in a row at the end of the season, which meant that we managed to win the division because obviously the Ravens lost Lamar. So, look, if we end up firing on all cylinders, yes, we could do it again. But obviously, with this calf injury at this point, I think we're going to end up missing the playoff. But I don't think the team are going to want to treat the season like that at this point. So I think they're going to try and push him out. And I think ultimately he's going to play mediocre for the majority of the season. As a fantasy manager, I'm actually quite worried at this point for Joe Burrow and the majority of that offense. Like Jamar Chase really has not performed well at all so far from a fantasy perspective this season. Obviously, we had that dud game last week from T. T showed much more this week and did much better. But I just don't think the way he's playing and how his calf is, he's going to be able to support everyone. So I am really quite nervous at this point, especially because obviously Chase, you were drafting him in the first round, so you need him to be that stud if you've got him on your team. And I am concerned that he is not going to be that. I mean, he didn't even finish in the top 50 this week, which is a complete disaster. 55 wide receiver 55 he finished this week. Bad.
Yeah, I have a lot of Chase. I've so much Chase, so much Burrow. To be fair, I think my home dynasty, I've actually stacked them both. But yeah, you know, how many times as fantasy players have we seen this where we've drafted a QB and then they don't look right, and then at the end of the season they come out and go, oh, they've been playing through an injury all season and they've not quite been what you expect. Now, I think personally, I'd prefer Joe Burrow to maybe, as a fantasy owner, I'd prefer him to sit maybe a couple of weeks, get himself back to 100% health, and then come back in and play. But I understand from a Bengals organization, if they can have him play the next two games and maybe get 2 wins. You know, I think you play the Rams in week 3. I'm not sure who you play week 4, but if you can get a couple of wins and be 2-2, all of a sudden your outlook on the whole season changes. So to me, I think the whole thing with the Bengals at the moment is all just a bit of a worry. And I think if I was to choose one player from that team that I could pick and start every week, I think it's Joe Mixon, if I'm honest. What do you think? If you had to pick one player from that team?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately he will probably be the most reliable in that obviously he is less affected by Joe Burrow having issues.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, generally, I just don't think the offense is playing particularly well. And to be fair, he's doing okay. I think he finished as a running back 19 this week, which we'll mention later because obviously I'd mentioned him last week. But yeah, I totally agree. I think he is the most reliable. Now, I think his ceiling is probably going to be limited if the offense can't get itself together. But I think from a floors perspective, he has the highest floor of the group. But ultimately, I am nervous to start any of these at the minute. Like I have Joe Burrow in the Scott Fish Bowl, and I think next week I'm probably not even going to play him. Like if he starts, I've also got Sam Howell and Derek Carr, and I think ultimately I'll probably play those two over him, just because I don't feel like I can trust him at the moment.
That's a mega call. That's a mega call to bench Joe Burrow for Carr and Sam Howell. That's big.
It is, but
I get the theory behind it, but I think that's a big call.
Obviously, Carr hasn't played yet this week, but Sam Howell had more points than Burrow, and I wouldn't be surprised if Derek Carr doesn't either. You know, and I just think, you know, his total offense, I think so far in the past 2 weeks has been like 200, just over 200 yards. Like it's between 200 and 300 yards. You know, it's terrible. You know, what is he giving you? He thankfully managed to throw 2 touchdowns this week, but they're the only things that have saved him so far. I don't feel comfortable with starting him, particularly if I've got a decent second QB. I'll choose them, particularly next week. He's done his calf again. He's not going to be mobile. He's going to be when he's not comfortable, he throws these screen passes behind the line of scrimmage, and they never get anywhere now because everyone knows that they're coming. Like he just gets the ball out, and I can't see it. Yeah, going anywhere until he's showing me that he has kind of settled down and things are starting to click. I'm not massively keen on starting him.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
I know you see, look, at least I'm realistic about the Bengals.
I love it.
I've been a Bengals fan for a long time. I understand losing. I'm used to it. We're eternal pessimists as Bengals fans because we're not used to being successful. So, I'm a realist, and I have to say, if I've got someone else on my bench, I'm starting them over Joe Burrow, I think, next week. Should we talk about some other news, Paul?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, the thing that I actually found most interesting this week was literally, I would say, 10 minutes before the 6 o'clock games were due to start. I saw this thing on Twitter. I think it was originally came from Underdog, saying that Cam Akers was going to be a healthy scratch this week, and that he was potentially going to be on the trade block. And then I saw it kind of percolating around. I didn't know, is it going to be true? Is it not? But ultimately, it was true, and they held him out. And now they're saying that he's a potential trade candidate. The last few years of his career have been quite a roller coaster. And as a fantasy manager owning him, it's been an absolute nightmare. So, what do you think this actually means for him going forward? Excuse me.
I don't know. Right. If anyone can figure out what's going on with Cam Akers and the Rams and the relationship and what's happened there, that person could win any fantasy season anywhere, because nobody knows. Cam Akers actually tweeted going, "I'm just as confused as everybody else. I'm blessed though." I'm starting to think, does he even know what's going on there? Well, I know nobody knows the true story of what happens behind the scenes and stuff like that, but I don't know. I really don't know what's happened there. I hope he gets traded away, because we have seen flashes of Cam Akers, and he has shown that he has a potential, but it's obviously his future is not with the Rams. So I hope he does get a trade out of there.
Do you think there are any potential trade partners for him?
So, we're both on X, and, we see a lot of these people on X talking about it, but I think there's a couple of spots where you could potentially see him do something. And I think, to me, there's one or two places. The first one would be the Vikings. Obviously, they're not. I don't know if they don't trust Alexander Mattison. I don't know if maybe he had a tough week and he was not efficient or what. Like, I think he rushed the ball something like 4 times this week. That's not somebody that you've got much confidence in, So I'd say either the Vikings or the other one would be the Ravens. I think the Ravens could do with somebody, better there. So, but he's going to be quite cheap. But that's just off the top of my head, What do you think?
Well, I mean, to me, ultimately, I think if you're trading for him, he's really just another body, isn't he, at this point? Like, I know, like the end of last season, we saw some really great things from him, but clearly there's been something going on with him and the Rams in that, for some reason he's been benched again. I find it really weird because obviously in the off-season they were like, oh yeah, Cam Akers, he could be our 3 down back. And then week 1, obviously he doesn't do much. Week 2, he's inactive. It's just really weird. And I think teams are going to be kind of put off by that. And I think if you're trading for him, I don't think you can expect too much from him. So I do think ultimately it's just another body. So I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I can see maybe saying, right, we can have him as the RB3 instead of Melvin Gordon or something like that. But I can't see him doing a lot. Like, from a fantasy perspective, Paul, if you're a Cam Akers owner, what you're doing with him, and if, I suppose, generally as an overall fantasy outlook, do you think that's his kind of fantasy future finished?
Yeah, in a nutshell, yes, it is. I think he's done. I think, like you said, I don't think he's really going to have much. I don't think teams are going to pay that much for him. If the Rams are quite happy to let him go on a cheap, he may get a move somewhere. If you're a Cam Akers owner, you have to sit on him. You have to sit and see. Don't drop him yet. Don't drop him yet. See where he goes. If he gets that move away, I'm not saying it will be the Ravens. I'm not saying it will be the Vikings or anything like that. If he ended up at the Vikings, you hold him and you see what he does within his first couple of weeks. You know, if in 2 weeks after he's sort of gone there and you're talking week 5, 6, maybe even 7, and he's seeing maybe 3, 4 rushes, you know, at the wrong times of the game, then yeah, he's possibly a drop candidate, you know.
Yeah,
But
I do like the idea of Vikings actually, Paul. I think, you know, just as a second body alongside Alexander Mattison, take some of those touches, who could potentially be better. I mean, the difficulty I have with the Vikings is I don't actually know what they think they are.
yeah,
You know, do they think they're rebuilding? Do they think that they're competitive? Obviously, so far they lost this week. Are they 0-2?
yeah, they're 0-2, but actually they're one of the highest scoring teams or something, aren't they? So they're moving the ball. They're just, and this is the story of the Vikings, though, isn't it? You know, the Vikings all of last year they won so many games, but they won it by one possession or something like this. You know, are we seeing the opposite this year now? And they're losing these games by one possession. You know, they lost to the Eagles on Thursday Night Football, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to get, you know, they put 28 points past the Eagles, so they're moving the ball and they're doing things with it. It's just you know, they put 17 points past the Buccaneers as well and lost 2017, so they lost that by one score. They lost the Thursday night game by one score, you know. So I think you're right with the Vikings. I think they don't know what they are. They don't know if they're a playoff team. They don't know if they're a rebuild team. They don't know if they're, you know, divisional leaders or what. They just don't know, do they?
Yeah, so that makes me wonder, like, do they want to invest anything, you know, into kind of this season?
I think Cam Akers will be cheap, though.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, I don't know. I think if they were 2-0, then certainly I think they might be like, oh, yes. But now they're 0-2. Again, I don't know how they're evaluating their season. You would have hoped that they would have beaten Tampa Bay, you know, in week 1, to be honest. I understand the Eagles maybe not the easiest to get past, or they're not playing brilliantly so far this season. But yeah, I do like, you know, from a kind of football perspective, I do like the idea, but I don't know how the front office see the Vikings at the moment and whether they would be interested in having another body or not.
Mm-hmm.
We've had another slew of injuries again this week. Honestly, this season, it's felt really brutal. I mean, I know we get injuries every season, but, you know, even in week 1 this season, we had an absolute ton of them. And here we are in week 2 with another load. So Devontae Adams, Jalen Waddle, Logan Thomas all entered the concussion protocol and left early on Sunday. Saquon Barkley and Odell had to leave with ankle injuries, and David Montgomery left with a thigh injury. They're probably the most fantasy relevant injuries that I can think of. Obviously, we've discussed Joe Burrow earlier. We don't know his status at the moment in terms of whether he's going to be able to play through that or not. So from kind of that list, Paul, which injuries are you most concerned about? And based on kind of that, is there anybody you'd be kind of keeping an eye on the waiver wire because of these injuries?
So these are really difficult. Okay, so Devontae Adams, Jalen Waddle, Logan Thomas are all concussion protocol. So they're potentially, you know, there's a good chance that all three of them suit up this week. I don't think Logan Thomas will. I think that was an awful hit to the head. Excuse me. But somebody like Devontae Adams could be back, suited up next week and playing again. So I'm not really taking much out of them. Now, the one that really worries me is Saquon. You know, we've seen him have these injuries to his ankle and high ankle sprains, and he's, you know, he always sort of suffers these injuries and then he's out for a while. I'd like to find out a little bit more about what his injury is, and then I'd be maybe looking at who the backup at is it Matt Breida?
Yeah.
Breida, is he the backup? But you know, he'd be somebody I'd potentially be looking if the talk of Saquon is maybe missing a couple of weeks, then maybe he would be somebody that if he's on waiver wise, I'd be looking to pick up. Odell, again, yes, he is maybe a little bit of a worry, but the people that you'd be looking to pick up are the likes of Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, them sort of players. And I'm guessing they're not on your boards and they're not going to be available. So, if anything, if you are the owner of them, then you'd be happier flexing or starting one of them in the wide receiver position. The same with David Montgomery. I think his injury looked nasty. And the fact that they had to get the golf cart out for him to take him to where he needed to go, and they had his knee all strapped up, I could see him maybe missing a significant amount of time. But yet again, the backup there is Jahmyr Gibbs, so he's not going to be available on waiver wires. Maybe you'd be looking for a deeper running back. Off the top of my head, I don't know who that is there, but again, I think it just gives me a bit more confidence to start Jahmyr Gibbs in week 3. And hopefully they give him the role that we all predicted he could get at the start of the season. What about yourself? Is there anyone that you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've covered most of them. I mean, I think their third running back is it Craig Reynolds?
I don't know. I'm just getting the depth chart up now.
When Montgomery went out, he actually took over basically Montgomery's role. Gibbs, I think, had a very small bump, but very little bump in usage, even when Montgomery went out. So you would hope that Gibbs takes on a bigger work kind of role, but actually he didn't take on. I don't think he had any more rushing attempts when Montgomery left. So I certainly think it's Craig Reynolds.
Yes, it is Craig Reynolds.
He would be someone that I would certainly be considering, because if he takes the Montgomery role, I mean, we've seen how kind of good that Montgomery role is. Now, obviously, he isn't David Montgomery, so he's probably not going to be as good in that role. But if you've got these deep kind of leagues, I would be certainly popping him on my bench there, potentially seeing what he does next week. And if Montgomery's out for a few weeks, then, he could potentially be a flex play for you. But yeah, I mean, the hope is, particularly for Gibbs managers, that he starts to do a bit more with the ball there, and maybe with an extra week of practice, we might see some more Gibbs involvement in the rushing game as well as in the receiving game.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's rewind the tape, Paul, and discuss things that we've learned from last week that we feel is going or does help us or will help us as fantasy managers kind of moving forward. So what takeaways have you got for me from week 2, Paul?
So I've got a couple. The first one I want to talk about is I'm going to mention it as the Commanders' backfield, the Washington Commanders. They no longer have a split backfield. Okay, so coming into this season, I know I'm a big believer of Brian Robinson, but there was also a lot of debate on who was going to be the guy. Was it going to be a 1A, 1B? Are they going to split it? What was going to be the case? Now, I'm thinking after 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure that's Brian Robinson's role, and it's his job to lose now. Okay, so the 2 weeks combined, I've got some stats here. Robinson has rushed the ball 37 times for 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's also been targeted 5 times with 3 receptions for 49 yards and 1 touchdown, which great numbers. He's on my Scott Fishbowl team this week, so winner. But Antonio Gibson's numbers, he has rushed the ball a total of 5 times for 18 yards and has 4 receptions for 54 yards. Now, these numbers are somebody that you're not even going to put in your flex spot now. Okay, so I no longer trust Antonio Gibson, but I'm all in on Brian Robinson now. I think that's his role. I think that's his backfield. So my question to you is, do you agree that it's Brian Robinson's backfield? And are there any other backfields where maybe we thought it was a 1A, 1B and it sort of leans somewhere, it leans in favor of somebody else? Or even not just that, a wide receiver room where you thought it was going to be a question between 2, but it just clearly seems to be 1. Is there any other backfields like that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in Washington there. Brian Robinson seems to be the guy. They seem to like him, don't they? Much better than Gibson. Gibson fumbled in week 1 and he hasn't rushed since. So I can, it's Brian Robinson here, which is, yeah, I agree. I was more in on Brian Robinson than Gibson this season. I took loads of Brian Robinson actually quite early on because I was often kind of doing more either a zero running back or a kind of hero running back type build with a lot of my teams, and he was one of the guys that I was taking. Then I kind of took my foot off the gas a little bit, got a bit worried that maybe Gibson is going to be more involved, listen to some of the people that kind of convinced me a little bit that maybe he's going to have the McKinnon role, and kind of eat into this backfield a little bit more because the enemy was coming over. So I took my foot off the gas a little bit with Brian Robinson a bit later on in the season, but they clearly feel that he is the guy there. So I agree. I don't think I could start Gibson at all at the moment until I see that he gets more work, which I'm not convinced he's going to unless Robinson gets injured. The other backfields, the first one that springs to mind, I suppose, really is the Buffalo backfield. There was a question mark. How much workload is James Cook going to get? He is a smaller back. We know he was pretty elusive last season, but didn't have a ton of work. We know he potentially, can do some receiving work. And I wasn't sure whether he was just going to be kind of a complimentary guy, kind of what we see now in Detroit, where I thought maybe Damian Harris would be like the Montgomery role, the early down guy, goal line guy, and then James Cook would come in and do the third down receiving work, kind of change of pace guy. But that does not seem to be the case at all. And actually, I think this week, Latavius Murray, in fact, had more attempts than Damian Harris this week. So for me, this is James Cook's backfield predominantly, but we are seeing Murray and Harris occasionally. I think they both got a touchdown, didn't they? But they are also occasionally mixing in. So I think, in terms of usage, this is Cook's backfield. I think where it gets messy in Buffalo is that obviously we've got Josh Allen, who likes to rush at the goal line, and then they've got these two other backs, Murray and Damian Harris. So I think, if I'm remembering correctly, those two guys had touchdowns this week and Cook didn't, even though he had the majority of the work. So it's a bit more messy than the Commanders, but I do think they are happier with Cook in kind of having the bigger role than the other guys. So I think that's kind of become a bit clearer than during the off season. I think the Eagles continue to be an interesting one, and obviously Gainwell is out at the moment with an injury, but to me, the main thing that's clear is that they do not trust Rashard Penny at all. I don't know how many times he rushed the other day. It wasn't many. I think it was, it was less than 10, wasn't it? Was it 5 times? Did he fumble? He did something that they didn't like as well. So for me, I kind of think that Penny might be droppable at this point, Paul. I don't know what you think. Maybe I'm being a bit hasty, but, look, Gainwell was out last week. This was his opportunity to show what he can do, and they just used Swift. And how many times did they run the ball? So many times. And it was all Swift. He came in 3 or 4 times, did very little, and they seemed not very keen at all to use him. So I do wonder whether he should be or could be dropped at this point, particularly in leagues with short benches.
Yeah, so the Eagles is one that the other one that I wanted to mention. I'm glad you brought them up, to be fair. It's, we look at week 1, Kenny Gainwell seen it all, DeAndre Swift seen 1 rush, and Penny didn't. I think he was a healthy scratch or something, wasn't he, week 1? And then week 2, Kenny Gainwell's out, and you're like, okay, it's going to be the other 2. And then, I know a lot of people that are all in on Penny and what he can be and everything like this. And then he actually rushed the ball, I think it was 3 times, this week. And then you look at DeAndre Swift, who rushed the ball 28 times. 28 times for 170 yards and a touchdown. But I still don't trust that that's going to be them going forward. I still don't think it's going to be I don't think next week we're going to see, right, if Kenny Gainwell's going to come back, are we going to then see Gainwell and Swift, or is it going to be all game? Do you know what? I think it's going to be one of them where, as a fantasy manager, you're just going to be praying that you're playing best ball, and you've got them both, and you just hope that it doesn't matter which one of them goes off. You've got them both on your team, and if he goes off, he's in your team. You know, I know easily 3 or 4 people that had benched DeAndre Swift this week. I actually I think you're in that league with me, the ultimate salary cap.
Oh, yeah.
I think you're in that league with me. I benched him this week, and he sat on my bench with all them points because I just didn't trust him because he only rushed the ball a couple of times week 1. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I don't think Penny is worth a drop yet. Not yet. It depends what this injury with Gainwell's doing. And, I know we don't want injuries, but if there's an injury to Swift and Gainwell's still out, all of a sudden Penny becomes the guy then, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. And I do think in these deeper bench leagues, if you've got space, then yes. If I have a short bench league and there's someone decent on the waiver wire, I would consider dropping him, to be honest. I totally get what you're saying. If Gainwell's injury lingers and Swift comes down with an injury, which we know that he can do, Penny is going to have to carry, although are they going to get Boston Scott involved? Because Boston Scott, I think, did more.
Only when they play the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get a touchdown, obviously. But, I just feel like they really just do not trust Penny at all. I don't understand why.
Agree.
We saw what he did at Seattle. But if I had a short bench and there was, guys on the waiver wire that I thought could contribute to my team, now I would drop him. Now, that could be a mistake. But I kind of feel like he might be wasting a spot on your bench in these short bench leagues.
Yeah, short bench
ones, not in the deeper ones, of course. If you've got space to keep him, then definitely do. But I think if they're decent players in these short bench ones, I think I would be dropping him at this point because last week was his chance in it, and it showed to me that they don't trust him, and he didn't really do a lot with what he had either. So I'm disappointed.
Yeah,
because we know how great he can be. We saw it in Seattle, and I really thought that he was going to be the main guy, and I just don't think that's going to be how it plays out, which is disappointing.
Yeah. Have you got anything for us? The rewind.
I have actually. So this might sound silly to a lot of people that play a lot of Dynasty, which I think, to be honest, is a lot of us, particularly in the UK. Dynasty, I think, is a massive thing and probably bigger thing here than in the US even. So for people that already play Dynasty, this probably doesn't make sense. But for people that are used to playing redraft only, I think they get a bit nervous about taking rookies, particularly those ones that go higher. So I'm talking of the likes of the Jordan Addisons, the Zay Flowers, that you're drafting, reasonably high in these redraft leagues. Don't be scared to take them because as I say, I think redraft players often like to kind of draft what they know. And they're like, well, I don't know if this rookie's going to be any good or not, so I'm not going to draft them. But already we're seeing the fruits of some of these rookies, and that's even in week 2. Zay Flowers, a great example. Now, Puka Nacua, a lot of people will not have drafted him. He will have been on many, many waiver wires, but in these deeper leagues, some people have. And look at him go. I mean, he has been fantastic for the first couple of weeks. Jordan Addison, he's currently playing as a wide receiver 3 on that team, but he's getting targets when he's on the field. He's being targeted and he's getting these touchdowns. So he is, giving you some fantasy relevance already. And I think that's only going to get more and better throughout the rest of the season. So don't be scared to take a punt on rookies in redraft leagues. As I say, I think for people that play Dynasty, they're already in that kind of mindset. And sometimes I think you can go a bit extreme. And you can be like, oh, I know this rookie's going to be great, or no. You end up getting too many. You need a balance. But But I do think don't be scared to take a punt on some of these because they often will work out. Usually it's later on in the season, but this season we're already seeing some of them work out now.
Yeah, I agree. Because we've mentioned it before, where you have to sort of go from that dynasty mindset to that redraft mindset, and as we know, so for example, we know that tight ends are not really that good in their rookie year. So we gave good friend of ours, Mags, a lot of abuse for taking Dalton Kincaid everywhere, you know. But actually, I don't think he's had a bad start to the season. And if you drafted him as a tight end, he's not a bad tight end to have picked up, you know. So I'm inclined to agree with you. Now, Puka Nacua, who set a new NFL record for the most amount of receptions by any player in their first 2 games ever, which was 25. I think the past record was 19. Now, if anyone tells you that they drafted Puka Nacua, they're probably lying. And if anyone tries to tell you that they were like, yeah, I'm all in on them, if their name wasn't Matt FF Dynasty, they were lying. Because there seems to be a lot of people that are victory lapping this. And I think it was Tom, NFL T-Strack, who put something in the Sanctuary Discord earlier that was like, he did X amount of drafts during the off season, and Puka Nacua was taken in none of them. These were ones I think he did on the show. So, you know, but yet you've got all of these analysts that are saying how amazing he is, and they were all in on him since April. But yes, so to go with your thing that we've learned, we do need to start drafting rookies a bit more. We do need to have a bit of faith in them. I do actually have quite a few shares of Jordan Addison. I liked what he was. I liked where he landed. I liked what he could do in that team, and I think I've started him in a couple of places in both weeks now. So I'm getting rewarded for that. You know, he's not set the world alight like Puka Nacua, but I think he's had a touchdown in both of his games at about 70, 80 yards in both his games. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even looking at those that were drafted later, so like the Jane Reeds, Marvin Mims came through this week. You know, he only had three receptions, but still he came through this week. You know, so they can be useful for you. So don't be scared to kind of draft them. I think sometimes people a bit too short-sighted, so they look at the beginning of the season. Who's going to help me now? But actually, ultimately, I know it's a long season, but you want to start looking at the second half. Who's going to help me in the second half? Who's going to help me in the fantasy playoffs? I know you need to win at the beginning of the season to get to the playoffs, but you know, having that balanced roster in which you've got kind of these high upside players who might come along at the second half of the season with guys that you think are going to help contribute now are really going to help you kind of power through the season and hopefully then also have success in the playoffs too.
Yeah.
Did you have another thing you wanted to?
Yeah, so I'll touch on it quickly. Another thing that I start to keep an eye on now. It's not so much that I do it. I just start to look at these things now, and that's who are the teams that concede points. Okay, so for example, the Seattle Seahawks have conceded 30 points in week 1 and 31 points in week 2. So that tells me that their defense is not as good as what we thought it might be, you know? So that's a team that I'm going to target players against them. So if I've got somebody, you know, if I'm sat there on a Thursday night and I'm going through my lineups going, oh, do I start this guy or sit this guy and stuff like that? If I look at them and go, oh, right, he's playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or he's playing the Seattle Seahawks, I'm going to lean with that one because he's got the higher upside. So I just start looking at teams that are maybe conceding a lot of points. The Arizona Cardinals, you know, we're bleeding points. So, but we all knew that we'd start players that are playing the Cardinals because they're going to score points. So it's now trying to look at the other teams and not just go in, oh, right, let's target everyone playing the Cardinals. No, let's target somebody that's playing the Seahawks because they're bleeding points, you know. And the other thing that I do look at as well is I look at who seems to be stopping the run game. Now, at the moment, I've looked and there's two teams at the moment, and that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Philadelphia Eagles. They both seem to have held people that are running against them to sort of a minimum, more the Eagles than anything, but that's, you know, that's what we expect. So now I sort of look at that and go, you know, do I start a DeAndre Swift you know, not DeAndre Swift. Do I start somebody who's playing against the Eagles, or do I start the running back that's playing against the Seahawks? Because the Seahawks are bleeding points, but the Eagles are not really going to let you score many points. You know, it just sort of, you know, going into week one, we don't really have much of an idea about this kind of stuff. But now you can start having some sort of stats to back up what you're doing. So when you're looking at start sits, look at who the matchup is, look at, you know, even look at the weather with Matt FF Dynasty, look at the weather, look at the matchup, and you can start looking at teams like the Philadelphia Eagles going, I don't want to start my running back against the Eagles. Now, don't get me wrong, if you've got Saquon Barkley, you're not going to bench him because he's playing the Eagles and start, I don't know, some third string running back because he's playing the Seahawks. I'm not saying that, but if you've got a tough choice where you've got, I don't know, say you've got a Brian Robinson against the Seahawks, or you've got a Gus Edwards versus the Eagles, and you're trying to decide between which one of them to start, then, you know, I'm going to lean the one that's playing the Seahawks more than I am the one playing the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an absolutely perfect thing to do. I think it's particularly important for you to flex plays, like you say. Often you're like, oh, should I start X player over Y player? Especially when you're deciding between different positions, because I find that quite tricky. You know, it's much easier when you say, oh, do I start X wide receiver versus Y wide receiver, because you can look at someone else's rankings, or, you know, kind of have a bit more of an idea. But when you're trying to compare, do I start X running back versus Y wide receiver? Well, you know, who are they playing? How good have they been against, you know, that position? Like you say, if they've been last against running backs, then maybe that running back, you know, and that running back's playing them this week, then maybe he's the great flex play versus the wide receiver. So yeah, 100% agree with that. Look at and see what the kind of teams against them have been doing, and, you know, how would that kind of fit for your fantasy team, and will that be, you know, conducive to points for you? So, Paul, let's have a look at our fantasy studs of the week. So hopefully you know what this is by now, and it's basically we look at these under the radar players who we think can overperform and exceed expectations. So let's have a look at how we did last week, Paul. I actually think we did okay. So obviously your stud was Jordan Addison. He had 3 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown and finished as a wide receiver 26. Mine was Tajay Spears. He had 8 attempts for 49 yards and 2 receptions for 6 yards, surprisingly finishing as a running back 27. That was ahead of AJ Dillon as well. And Lewis's stud was Robert Woods. Now, he picked the wrong wide receiver from Houston, unfortunately, but he still had 6 receptions for 74 yards and finished as a wide receiver 36. So I think we did okay there, to be honest, Paul.
I think one of us did better than the other two as well, you know, with the wide receiver 26.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, I know I had a bit of a go at you last week and said that I didn't think that, you know, he would do as well as he has. But to me, you know, he's still running as a wide receiver 3, but it just shows how talented he is. Okay, Paul, fine. For once, you were maybe reasonably correct. It won't. We know how it goes.
That's why I'm going to victory lap this all day.
That's the only week you'll be right.
Yeah.
But, you know, it just shows her, doesn't it, that he, you know, he's getting open, he's getting targeted. Kirk Cousins wants to go to him. So I don't think it's going to be too long at all before he's wide receiver 2 here. And I did put him in some lineups this week, actually, and it did pay off. So thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
I will say that you did a good job there. I'm disappointed that Tajay Spears didn't do as much as I hoped, because obviously that was a really close game. But hey, I think he's going to start working in there a little bit more at some point. So,
agree.
Paul, who is your week 3 fantasy stud?
So I've listened to everyone and decided that I'm going to pick somebody who's playing against the Cardinals, and I've gone for Jake Ferguson, the Dallas Cowboys tight end. And looking back to the history of fantasy football, you always start the tight ends that are playing against the Cardinals because they just don't know how to do anything against tight ends. So Jake Ferguson for the Dallas Cowboys at the Arizona Cardinals this week is my stud of the week.
Yeah, well, I like it, Paul. Again, you're being very humble about your team, like me this week. So I will, I will go with it. I like it now. I've read this on Fantasy Pros now. I'm not sure now. I'm questioning whether it's true because I've been looking at some other sources, and I'm not sure that I'm totally convinced it's correct. But anyway, I'm going to go with it anyway.
Go with it.
My
Shoot your
fantasy
shot.
of the week this week is Joshua Kelly. Now, I think people will have been a bit put off after this week because he was obviously the lead running back there, and was it 3.6 fantasy points he got?
Something like that. I started him in
I
3
know.
leagues, I think.
Me too. I started him in a few places, and he was a complete disaster. I actually think ultimately, whether Eckler's back or not, I still think he's going to be a decent player. And actually, I think probably if Eckler's back, he's probably a better player. I think they've got this really great 1-2 punch there with Eckler and Kelly. And I think with Eckler being out, he struggled a little bit more. But I'd read that the Vikings have allowed a lot of fantasy points to running backs over the past couple of weeks. So the Chargers are at the Vikings this week. So I'm going to say that Joshua Kelly is going to be a fantasy stud this week, and he's going to redeem himself. So that people should be brave and pop him into their flex spots, because I do think that all is not lost with Kelly, and I think that you could potentially start him this week.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, just looking at his numbers, he scored more points week 1 when Austin Eckler was on the field than week 2 when Austin Eckler wasn't on the field. So I love the theory behind it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if Eckler's going to be back, but I do think, as I say, I know it kind of worried everyone this week, and I'm sure it's put a lot of people off, but I think you can be brave and pop him into your flex spot again this week, and I think potentially it'll come good for you, whether Eckler is there or whether Eckler is not. So, fantasy scare of the week, Paul. Obviously, this is someone who was drafted highly, who we think can underperform and upset us in our fantasy teams. So, last week, your potential scare was Gus Edwards. He had 10 attempts for 62 yards and a touchdown and finished as the running back 19. Lewis's scare, he was the most successful of us actually this week because he went with Tyreek Hill, and he did go from fantasy 1 to fantasy done because he had 5 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown. He was wide receiver 29. My potential scare was Joe Mixon, but he had 13 attempts, 59 yards, and 4 receptions for 36 yards, which made him finish as the running back 16. So I didn't do particularly well with my scares last week.
I wasn't much better.
No, but Lewis did okay, to be fair. So what about week 3, Paul? Who are you scared of?
So I'm scared of DeAndre Swift. I think people are going to be everywhere throwing him in. They're starting him because of what he's done this week. And like you've just said in your last thing, you're picking Joshua Kelly because he played the Vikings. Now, DeAndre Swift played the Vikings last week, and this week he goes up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, we know the Buccaneers are a much better team at defending the run. And I also think that everyone's going to fall into that trap of, oh my God, he was amazing last week. Let's all start him this week. So I'm just approaching it with a bit of caution, and I'm a bit worried about what he's going to do. So I'm a bit scared of DeAndre Swift this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an absolute fair point, isn't it? Like you say, the Tampa Bay have always been good against the run, and they're doing that again this year. And Gainwell may well be back. So who knows what Swift is going to do. So I don't think he's going to be anywhere near as good as he was last week. For me, he hasn't even played this week, but my potential scare for week 3 is Nick Chubb. So the Browns are facing the Titans in week 3, and they've actually been one of the top defenses against running backs so far this season. So I think Chubb is going to have a tough time against them, and I think there's a potential for him to have one of his more challenging weeks. And so I think that he potentially could be a scare in week 3.
I love it. I think the Titans have shocked people. I think they're struggling to move the ball, but I think on the other side of the ball, they're playing really well. I think defensively they're playing really well, and it's hard to argue against that, Hannah, to be fair.
They're going to be in mediocrity again, aren't they? So that again, they're going to struggle to get that high enough pick, I don't think, to be able to draft a decent QB. But
you mean Will Levis is not a decent QB?
Well, I mean, he is their third string quarterback at the moment, isn't he? So clearly he's fantastic when he couldn't beat out Malik Willis. I mean, he might have done now, but
I keep getting a notification every Sunday saying Will Levis has gone from healthy to out. So he's, there's something wrong with him. I don't know what's wrong with him, but I agree with what you're saying. Though they are middle of the bag, and they're not really going to get an early pick for a elite QB.
They might squeak in the playoffs, though, particularly since the Chargers are also 0-2 so far. So they could squeak into a wild card spot. Yeah, although, like you say, that offense is pretty horrendous. They did look better this week, though, to be fair to them.
Yeah.
So, wildcard of the week, Paul, our hot takes. I have to say our hot takes last week were pretty shoddy. So you predicted that the Rams would beat the 49ers. To be fair, it was closer than I thought it was going to be. But the 49ers ultimately overcame the Rams and they won. Lewis thought that the Chiefs would fall to 0-2. He picked the wrong team there, didn't he? Because they did happen to overcome the Jaguars. And I thought the Browns would be the only team in the AFC North to finish 2-0 and be alone at the top of the AFC North. And of course, was incorrect because my Bengals fell at the hands of the Ravens. So we did a terrible job of our hot takes. So what do you think could ring true this week, Paul?
First of all, I'd like to say I said that last week and then had you and Lewis laugh at me and then went away and thought, yeah, maybe I was being a bit ridiculous there. And then watched that game and thought, oh my God, the Rams could actually do this. They looked really good, to be fair to them. They looked like they were in that game. So I was quite proud of that one. So this week, I'm not going to say, who's going to win, who's not going to. I'm going to say the Chargers versus the Vikings is going to be the highest scoring game this week, and it's going to have over 60 odd points on the board. So I'm basically going. My wildcard hot take this week is to start all Chargers and Vikings players, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, the lot, QBs, the lot. Start them all because that's going to be the game of the week that is this week.
Yeah, I can see it actually. Both of those teams have been in very high scoring games so far this season, haven't they? So I can see that being a shootout. And both of them are 0-2, so someone's going to get a win finally. So that's going to be a fun and interesting game. Paul, I won't hold you to it, but what's your prediction? Who do you think is going to get the W?
The Chargers.
Yeah, that's where I would go, but could be wrong there. Could be wrong. They've struggled so far. The Titans beat them, so
I'd be interested to see how the Vikings react as well if they end up going 0-3.
Yeah.
0-3 and, putting a lot of points on the board in all of their games. And it'd be interesting to see how they react.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I do you at that point say, right, let's just pull it down. Let's, Kirk ultimately is not going to be there next season, I don't think. So, do we try and get what we can?
Where's Kirk going to be next year?
Oh, I think the 49ers now, I don't know really. But I think they'd love, ultimately would have loved to have had him. I don't know. I don't think he's going to be there. Washington? What do you think? No, he wouldn't go back, would he? Don't know.
I was going to say he's got the ties. He's got the ties with Washington, hasn't he? So
what do you think?
I reckon he's still there.
Do you reckon? Maybe,
Mm.
maybe. But yeah. I just think they need to figure out what they want to do with that team.
Yeah,
And it's
agreed.
another
What's
way.
your hot take?
So mine isn't particularly fantasy based, but I'm as a true Bengals fan, I'm going to say that they're going to lose on Monday Night Football to the LA Rams. So they're going to go 0-3 on the season.
You're so bitter at you.
Well, the thing is, right, this Rams team is really feisty, isn't it? We all came into this team thinking they're going to be rubbish. They're not going to be able to do anything, and here they are, super feisty. Hanging in all games, won one, lost one. I can see them beating them out. We're just a bit pitiful at the moment, so hey, why not?
It's hard. It's hard to disagree with you. It's hard to. I can see the logic behind it,
I mean,
but
they shouldn't. Based on the talent they've got and everything, they shouldn't lose.
Lewis has just texted me and said his hot pick this week is that the Bengals beat the Rams.
I know. Well, it's going to be, isn't it? And once they start losing, the hot take is going to be that they're going to win anything. But hey, yeah. So, Paul, we have reviewed week 2. Anything else you wanted to add before we finish up?
No, I think that's it. I think we're good.
So that brings us to the end of the show. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on X. We are at Wildcard Rewind, and of course, we always love to hear from you. Send us your feedback, any questions you've got. We would love to hear from you and chat through some of your questions or comments or anything in the shows. And then don't forget to head over to our YouTube channel and search for the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast Network, and you'll find all of our different offerings there. Obviously, we've now got DFS. We're going to have Devi in the future. They're doing some great things on X so far, so make sure you're following them. And then, of course, the Dynasty Show too. So make sure you give us a subscribe there. And then, otherwise, enjoy Monday Night Football, and we will see you to review week 3 next week.